The letter from the attorney's office arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a utility bill and a pizza coupon. I almost threw it away. The envelope was thin, off-white, with a return address in a town I hadn't visited since I was 9 years old. Hartwell, Iowa. I had to read the name twice before it connected to anything. Raymond Elmer Miller, a great-uncle on my father's side, a man I had met exactly once at a family reunion where he sat at the edge of a picnic table, said almost nothing, and left before the pie was served. Raymond was dead. And for reasons no living person could explain to me, he had left me 47 acres of farmland. I called the attorney the next morning, a man named Lyle Crenshaw, who spoke slowly and clearly, like someone used to delivering news that required patience. Your great-uncle had no children, Mr. Miller. No spouse. He lived alone on that property for the better part of 30 years. The will is straightforward. The land, the structures, and everything on the parcel passes to you. Why me? A pause. The sound of papers being straightened. The will doesn't say why. It just says your name. I didn't know what to do with that. I was 28 years old, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Cedar Falls with a kitchen faucet that dripped no matter how hard I cranked the handle. I worked at a diesel repair shop 6 days a week, rebuilding injectors and replacing head gaskets on trucks that belonged to other people. My savings account had $1,100 in it. I didn't own land. I didn't farm. I barely had a relationship with my own father, let alone a great-uncle I had met once when I was 9. But the land was mine now, so I decided to go see it. I drove out on a Saturday in late October, the kind of morning where the sky looks like a sheet of cold tin and the fields have already gone to stubble. My truck rattled over county roads I didn't recognize, past grain elevators and wind-bent trees, until the GPS told me I had arrived. I pulled over onto a gravel shoulder and sat there with the engine running, staring at what was mine. It didn't look like much. A wire fence leaned at odd angles, half its posts rotted through. Beyond it, the land stretched flat and gray-brown, with patches of standing water that caught the dull light. No crops, no cattle, just earth that looked exhausted, like it had given up trying to be useful a long time ago. Near the road stood a machine shed, a long, low building with corrugated metal walls gone orange with rust. Its sliding door was chained shut, and the chain was brown too, frozen in place by years of weather. I got out. The wind hit me sideways, carrying the smell of wet clay and dead grass. My boots sank a little with each step. The soil had a strange consistency, not quite mud, not quite solid. It clung to my soles like it was trying to hold me in place. I walked the perimeter. 47 acres of this. Bad drainage. Heavy clay. Subsoil. The kind of ground that swallows fence posts and spits out anything you try to plant. I could see why nobody had farmed it in years. The neighboring fields were green with winter wheat, but Raymond's land sat empty, a brown rectangle in a quilt of green, like a tooth missing from a smile. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, watching a crow circle overhead, and I thought, why would anyone leave me this? The first call came before I even got home. A man named Dale Hutchins said he was a neighbor. His voice was friendly, unhurried, the way people talk in small towns when they want something but aren't ready to say it yet. Heard about your uncle's passing. Real sorry. Ray was a good man, kept to himself, but a good man. A pause. Listen, if you're thinking about what to do with that parcel, I'd be happy to take it off your hands. Fair price. Save you the headache. I told him I'd think about it. The second call came 2 days later. A woman from a real estate office in town. She had a client interested in vacant agricultural land. Was I aware that holding unproductive acreage meant property tax with no return? She could connect me with a buyer who'd close fast. I told her I'd think about it. The third call was from a man named Gene Kessler. He didn't introduce himself as a neighbor. He said he was a businessman, that he had interests in the area, and that he could offer me $60,000 for the whole parcel, cash, no contingencies. His voice was different from Dale's, quicker, tighter, like a man used to getting what he wanted before the other person had time to think. It's not worth much, Mr. Miller. You know that. The soil out there is practically cement. Nobody's been able to grow a thing on it in 20 years. I'm doing you a favor. I almost said yes. $60,000 was more money than I had ever seen in one place. I was 28, working at a diesel repair shop in Cedar Falls, renting a one-bedroom apartment with a kitchen faucet that dripped no matter how hard I cranked it. $60,000 would change things. But something in his voice stopped me. Not what he said, how he said it. Too eager, too quick, like a man buying something he knows is worth more than what he's paying. I told him I'd think about it. The bank called too. Not directly, not a sales pitch, just a friendly reminder that inherited property came with inherited obligations, taxes, insurance, liability. A representative with a patient voice explained that many people in my situation chose to liquidate quickly. It was the smart financial move. Everyone wanted me to sell. That was the part I couldn't stop turning over in my head. Not one person, not Dale, not the real estate woman, not Gene Kessler, not even the bank, suggested I keep it. Not one of them said, you might want to hold on to that land and see what it's worth. They all agreed it was worthless. And they all wanted to buy it. I went back on a cold morning in November. I brought bolt cutters, a flashlight, a pry bar, and a thermos of black coffee. The sky was the color of old newspaper, and the wind was sharper than before, cutting through my Carhartt jacket like it wasn't there. I started with the machine shed. The chain on the door was thick but brittle. Rust had eaten through the links, and the bolt cutters went through with a sound like a branch snapping. The padlock fell into the weeds. I grabbed the door handle, a steel bar wrapped in cracked rubber, and pulled. Nothing. Years of oxidation had welded the track shut. I sprayed penetrating oil along the rail and waited, stamping my boots to keep warm, watching my breath hang in the air. Then I pulled again, putting my weight into it, and the door screamed open on its runners, a sound like something waking up after a long, unwilling sleep. The smell hit me first. Diesel fuel, old and thick, mixed with grease and dust in the cold, mineral scent of concrete. It was a smell I knew from the shop, the deep, layered smell of a place where machines have lived and been tended to for years. But underneath it was something else, something older. Pipe tobacco, faint and sweet, trapped in the walls like a memory that refused to leave. I stepped inside. The concrete floor was smooth and clean, no cracks, no weeds pushing through. Whatever else had fallen into disrepair on this property, the shed floor had been poured right and poured thick. My boots echoed as I walked in. The flashlight beam swung across the walls, picking out pegboard hung with tools, wrenches organized by size, socket sets in labeled trays, torque handles hanging from hooks. A wooden workbench ran along the far wall, its surface scarred and stained dark with decades of oil. And on it sat a coffee mug, a pair of reading glasses, and a pencil sharpened to a point, as if someone had stepped away and intended to come back. And in the center of the building, taking up most of the floor space, sat a tractor. It was big. Not combine big, but bigger than any utility tractor I'd seen. Green paint showed under a thick layer of dust, but the green was wrong. Not factory, John Deere green, not case green, not any brand color I could name. More like the green of a copper roof gone halfway to patina. The body panels were hand-formed. I could see the hammer marks. The wheels were oversized, mounted on custom axles, and the tires, I crouched down to look. The tires were unlike anything in any catalog I'd ever flipped through. Wide, flat, textured with a tread pattern that looked almost organic, like the sole of some enormous boot designed to walk on water. I ran my hand along the fender. The metal was cold and gritty under my palm. This machine had not been bought. It had been built. Every weld, every bracket, every hose routing was hand-done. Not pretty, but precise. The work of someone who understood what forces would pass through each joint. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. I pulled open the cab door. The seat was cracked leather over a steel frame, and the dash was a mix of factory gauges and hand-wired instruments I couldn't identify. There was a smell inside the cab, faint underneath the dust, of pipe tobacco and WD-40. Raymond's smell, I realized, though I had no clear memory of the man himself. Under the seat, in a metal box bolted to the floor, I found the documents. Blueprints. Dozens of them, hand-drawn on drafting paper gone yellow at the edges. Each sheet showed a different system of the tractor. Suspension geometry, hydraulic circuits, tire pressure regulation, weight distribution calculations. The drawings were meticulous, labeled in a small, steady hand with notes in the margins. Some notes were technical, others were personal. Tested in Northfield after 3-day rain. No sinking, no rutting. She walks on this ground like it's pavement. Standard. Equipment compacts this soil past recovery. 14 pounds per square inch contact pressure. My machine. 4.2 pounds per square inch. The difference is everything. They will never understand this land because they have never built a machine that listens to it. There were letters, too. Correspondence with agricultural engineers, soil scientists, a professor at Iowa State. Raymond had written to them over the years, describing his work, asking questions, sharing data. Most of the replies were polite but dismissive. One professor wrote back, "Mr. Miller, while your observations about low ground pressure cultivation are interesting, the commercial viability of farming high clay vertisol at scale remains, in my professional opinion, negligible." Raymond had circled the word negligible and written next to it in pencil, "He hasn't seen my fields." There were also test logs, spiral notebooks filled with dates, soil moisture readings, crop yields, fuel consumption numbers. They went back more than 15 years. Raymond had been planting test plots on his own land, using his own machine, recording everything: soybeans, oats, winter wheat. The numbers started small and grew. By the last notebook, the yields were not just viable, they were competitive with the best farmland in the county. I sat in that cab for a long time, reading by flashlight, while the wind pushed against the walls of the shed and the cold crept up through the floorboards. My hands were shaking, and it was not from the temperature. I understood now. This land was not worthless. It was unworkable, but only with standard equipment. Standard tractors, with their narrow tires and high ground pressure, compacted the clay into something like stone. Every machine that had ever tried to farm these 47 acres had made the soil worse. The land fought back by refusing to grow anything. Neighbors gave up. County assessors marked it down. Everyone agreed. Bad soil, no future. But Raymond had spent 15 years building a machine that didn't fight the ground. It floated over it. It worked the soil without crushing it. And once the soil was given a chance to breathe, to open up, to do what soil is supposed to do, things grew. The land was not the problem. The equipment was, and Raymond had solved it. I called a mechanic friend named Curtis who owed me a favor and had a flatbed trailer. He drove out on a Saturday and stood in the doorway of the shed for a full minute before saying anything. "You're kidding me." "I'm not." "Who built this?" "My great uncle." Curtis walked around the tractor the way you walk around a building, slowly, looking up, looking down, touching things with just his fingertips. He's been wrenching since he was 14, same as me, and I could see his mind working, reading the machine like a sentence, following the logic from one connection to the next. We spent 3 weekends going through the tractor's systems. The engine was a modified 6-cylinder diesel, a Cummins block, it turned out, but derated and retuned for torque rather than horsepower. Raymond wanted pulling force at low speed, not velocity. The turbo had been replaced with a smaller unit to keep boost pressure gentle and consistent. The hydraulics were fully custom, plumbed through a manifold of brass valves and regulators mounted behind the cab, each one connected to an individual tire through braided steel lines. The system could independently adjust the air pressure in each tire while the machine was moving. Higher pressure on hard ground, lower on soft, all controlled from the cab through a set of hand-built levers that looked like they belonged on a pipe organ. The implement hitch was non-standard, designed for tools that would cut and aerate rather than plow and compact. I found 3 implements stored along the back wall of the shed: a subsoiler with narrow, angled shanks, a rotary harrow with spring-loaded tines, and a seed drill with depth wheels calibrated to fractions of an inch. Each one was hand-built, like the tractor itself. Each one bore the same precise, unbeautiful welds. Curtis stood back and shook his head. "Your uncle was either crazy or a genius." "Maybe both," I said. We changed the fluids, engine oil dark as coffee, transmission fluid gone thick as honey. We replaced the fuel lines, rubber gone brittle and cracked. Cleaned the injectors with solvent and compressed air. Put in fresh filters, oil, fuel, air. I ordered a fuel water separator from an agricultural supply catalog and mounted it on the firewall where Raymond's notes said it should go. The battery was dead, of course, so I bought a new one. Group 31, deep cycle, the biggest that would fit the tray. When I connected the terminals and tightened the clamps, the dash lights came on. Dim at first, flickering, then steady. Every gauge worked. The fuel gauge showed a quarter tank. The temperature needle sat at the bottom of its arc, waiting. I climbed into the seat. Cracked leather shifted under my weight. I set the throttle lever 1/3 of the way up, the way Raymond's notes specified for a cold start. I reached for the key, a plain brass key on a ring with no tag, no label, just the metal worn smooth by years of Raymond's fingers. I turned it. The starter ground for 2 seconds, 3. Then the engine caught, rough and uneven, coughing black smoke into the shed. I let it idle, listening to the rhythm find itself, and slowly the roughness smoothed out. The exhaust cleared from black to gray to almost nothing. The vibration through the seat settled into a low, steady pulse that I could feel in my chest, like a heartbeat. Curtis was grinning. "She runs." The smell of warm diesel filled the shed, mixing with the old grease and dust, and for a moment I could feel Raymond in there with me, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a presence in the machine itself, in the logic of every weld and every hand-routed hose. I started working, the fields in early spring, when the frost finally released its grip on the clay and the air smelled like thawing earth and distant rain. The first pass was the hardest, not because the machine struggled. It didn't. The tractor moved across the wet clay like it belonged there, the wide tires spreading its weight so gently that I could barely see tracks behind me. The cab vibrated with that same steady pulse I had felt when the engine first caught, low and patient. And through the glass I watched the subsoiler open the earth in clean, narrow furrows without tearing it apart. The hard part was believing it. I kept stopping, climbing down, kneeling in the soil to press my fingers into it. It was soft, open, alive, not compacted, not sealed. Where a standard tractor would have left ruts 6 inches deep and squeezed the air out of the clay like wringing a towel, Raymond's machine left impressions no deeper than a boot print. I could push my finger into the ground up to the second, knuckle without effort. I worked from dawn until the light failed, driving slow, following the contour lines Raymond had penciled onto a hand-drawn map of the property. North field first, then west, then the low section near the drainage ditch, where the clay was heaviest and the water sat longest. The tractor handled it all. On the soft sections, I felt the tire pressure adjust automatically, the machine sensing the ground, responding to it, lightening its footprint where the earth was most vulnerable. It was like watching someone hold a conversation. The tractor asked, the soil answered, and neither one raised its voice. I planted soybeans in the first 20 acres, following Raymond's notes as closely as I could. He had detailed planting depths, 1¼ inches in the north field, 1½ in the west, where the clay was denser, row spacing, seed varieties, inoculation schedules, everything calibrated for this specific soil on this specific piece of ground. I ordered the seeds he recommended, a variety called Heartland Clay Select that I had never heard of. Bred for heavy clay vertisol by a small seed company in southern Illinois. They arrived in plain brown bags with handwritten lot numbers. I planted by hand for the first 5 acres using the seed drill at its slowest setting, watching each row go in and wondering if I was wasting my time. By the end of the first week, my back ached, my hands were blistered, and I smelled like diesel and fresh dirt in a way that no shower could fully reach. I drove home each night with the windows down and the radio off, listening to nothing, thinking about nothing except the feel of that soil between my fingers. Weeks passed. I drove out every morning before my shift at the shop, parking on the gravel shoulder, and walking the rows in the thin light of early dawn. The air was cool and smelled like dew and clay. For a long time, nothing happened, just bare earth, dark and quiet, absorbing the rain and the sun and giving nothing back. I started to doubt. Maybe the soil was too far gone. Maybe 15 years of sitting idle had killed whatever biological structure Raymond had built. Maybe I was just a kid with a dead man's tractor in a field full of mud, doing something that every reasonable person had told me was pointless. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late May, I saw green, tiny shoots, hundreds of them, pushing through the dark clay in neat rows like stitches in a hem. I crouched down and touched one, barely a finger's length tall, and my throat tightened. The air was still. A meadowlark was singing somewhere in the fence row. The sun was just breaking the tree line, throwing long shadows across the field, and each small green shoot caught the light and held it like a candle. They were growing, in soil that every expert, every neighbor, every county agent had written off as useless. Something was growing. By July, the field was a deep, even green that you could see from half a mile down the road. The leaves were broad and healthy, catching the summer light and turning it into something useful. The rows were clean, no weeds to speak of. The clay, once aerated, supported the crop but resisted the invasives. Raymond had known that too. It was in the notes. People noticed. I saw trucks slow down as they passed, drivers leaning forward to look. Dale Hutchins drove by twice in 1 week and didn't call. Gene Kessler stopped calling entirely. The harvest came in September, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The air was dry and warm, carrying the sweet, papery smell of mature soybeans ready to drop. I rented a small combine from a dealer 2 counties over, carefully, the lightest model they had on the widest tires I could find, and brought it out on a flatbed. Curtis came to help. We spent a morning calibrating the header height and the cylinder speed, checking Raymond's notes for recommendations on threshing settings for clay-grown beans. I made the first pass at 7 in the morning, the combine crawling down the rows, and the sound of the pods breaking open was like rain on a tin roof. Steady, constant, thousands of small surrenders. The grain tank filled. I unloaded into my truck, drove to the elevator in town, and waited in line behind 2 other farmers while the operator ran the moisture test and the grade. He looked at the numbers on the printout, looked at me, looked at the numbers again. "Where'd you grow these?" "Raymond Miller's place." "The Miller 47? He pulled his cap off and scratched his head. "Nothing grows out there." "It does now." The yield was 46 bushels per acre. County average that year was 44. The moisture content was ideal. The test weight was above standard. The beans were clean, uniform, and dry enough to store without additional treatment. I sat in my truck in the elevator parking lot for a long time. The receipt was on the seat beside me, printed on that thin, thermal paper that curls at the edges. My hands were resting on the steering wheel, and they were shaking again, the way they had in the cab of the tractor that first day in November. 46 bushels per acre, on land that everyone said couldn't produce a weed. I picked up the receipt and read the number again. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my shirt pocket, next to my heart, and I sat there in the silence of the parking lot while the autumn sun came through the windshield and warmed my face, and I thought about a man I barely knew who had spent 15 years alone in a machine shed, building something nobody asked for, solving a problem nobody believed existed, because he knew that the land deserved better than what the world had decided it was worth. After that, things changed fast. Dale Hutchins came by one evening with a casserole his wife had made, chicken and rice, covered in foil, still warm. He stood on the shoulder of the road, holding the dish in both hands, looking at the harvested field. The stubble was gold in the low light, and the air smelled like dry straw and cooling earth. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he cleared his throat. "I owe you an explanation, Ethan." He told me something I hadn't known. Years ago, maybe 5, maybe 6 before Raymond died, Dale had asked him about the tractor. He'd seen it through the open shed door one afternoon when he'd come to check on a shared fence line. Raymond, against his usual nature, had shown him inside, shown him the blueprints, the notebooks, the tire pressure system, explained the concept, how standard equipment was destroying the very soil it was trying to work, how this land wasn't bad land, just misunderstood land, and how the right machine, built with patience and respect, could unlock what was underneath. Dale had been impressed. More than impressed. He'd been stunned. He'd grown up next to this property, watched his father and grandfather try to farm it and fail. And here was Raymond with data showing yields that matched the best ground in the county. But Dale had made a mistake. He'd mentioned it to Gene Kessler at a Rotary Club dinner. Just conversation, he'd thought. Just small talk about the eccentric old man down the road in his homemade tractor. He hadn't understood what Kessler would do with that information. Kessler was a land speculator. He bought cheap acreage, held it, and sold it when values shifted. Sometimes he made the values shift himself. When Raymond died, Kessler saw an opportunity. Buy the worthless land from the clueless nephew for pennies, then use the tractor's design to make it productive, and flip the property for 10 times what he'd paid, or sell the concept to a manufacturer. Either way, profit. The $60,000 offer was not charity. It was theft. "I should have told you sooner," Dale said. His voice was thick. He was still holding the casserole. I didn't think it was my place. And I was ashamed, if I'm honest. I'm the reason Kessler knew about the machine." I took the casserole from his hands. It was heavier than I expected, and the foil was warm against my palms. "It's all right, Dale." "Ray was a stubborn son of a gun," he said. He took off his feed cap and pressed it against his chest. "But he was right about that ground. He was right about all of it." We stood there together in the fading light, two men looking at a field that everyone had given up on, and neither of us said anything else for a while. There was nothing else to say. The field said it for us. The second year, I planted all 47 acres. Soybeans on 30, oats on 10, and a test plot of winter wheat on 7. I followed Raymond's notes and added my own. I kept his notebooks going. Same format, same careful handwriting, or as close to it as I could manage. My entries were messier, but the data was clean. The yields improved. 51 bushels per acre on the soybeans. The oats came in strong. The winter wheat survived a brutal freeze in January and came back green in March, like it had something to prove. The soil was changing year by year, less compacted, more structured, better drainage. Raymond's approach wasn't just about the tractor. It was about giving the land time to heal. The machine was the instrument. The patience was the method. I started getting calls again, but different ones. A reporter from the county paper wanted to do a story. An agronomist from Iowa State, the same university that had dismissed Raymond's letters, asked if she could visit and take soil samples. A representative from a farm equipment company wanted to see the tractor. I said yes to the reporter and the agronomist. I said no to the equipment company. Not yet. Gene Kessler called one more time. His voice was different now. Careful, respectful, with an edge of frustration underneath. "Mr. Miller, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to discuss a partnership." "I appreciate the call, Gene, but I'm not looking for a partner." Silence on the line. Then, "You're sitting on something bigger than you realize." "I know exactly what I'm sitting on. I'm writing this in the cab of Raymond's tractor, parked at the edge of the north field.